Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking something that is just incredibly fascinating and honestly intensely relatable. We're looking at the growing tension between popular online mental health advice and the gritty everyday reality of, actually paying our bills and keeping our friends. It is so incredibly easy to get swept up in the internet's framing of our personal limitations. But today we're going to explore how stepping into true self-accountability might actually be the real secret to our long-term happiness and financial stability. Okay, let's dive into this with a brilliantly provocative quote straight from our source material. You can be neurodivergent and also a jerk. Have you ever noticed how current online discourse kind of makes it seem like a diagnosis is a free pass? Well, the reality being highlighted here is that our current moment of mental health chatter has given some folks the impression that falling under certain umbrellas of neurodivergence somehow excuses you from the basic social contract. And look, while mental health struggles, whether it's anxiety, ADHD, whatever it might be, absolutely contextualize our behavior, they do not excuse us from it. You don't just get a blank check to treat others however you want. And that leads us directly to the cold, hard reality of the social contract. Much like free speech, we're all entirely free to act however we want. But, and this is a massive but, other people are not required to stick around for it. You absolutely cannot force others to endure toxic or endlessly stressful situations, and you for sure cannot woke scold someone into being your friend. If you find yourself coming out of, say, your sixth toxic roommate situation in 2 years, well, the healthiest thing you can do is probably look inward. All right, so let's move into part 1, redefining boundaries in relationships. To really grasp how unmanaged mental health impacts our interpersonal lives, we have to look at things like severe anxiety. We're talking about rumination, a desperate tendency to over-explain just to avoid being misunderstood, or moral scrupulosity, where you obsess over whether you're fundamentally good or bad. When those symptoms go unmanaged, you can easily end up pushing your anxiety right onto others, alienating close friends or business partners because you literally can't give them space. So the crucial point is how we define our terms, specifically the word boundaries. The internet loves to misuse this word. Online, it's often framed as an imposition you place on someone else, like, my boundary is you have to communicate with me this way. But our source clarifies that boundaries are actually just rules for your own behavior. A true boundary isn't saying you can't do that. It's saying, if you do that, here is how I will react. You can only ever control yourself. Let's look at how this actually plays out by comparing internet discourse with social reality. Take time blindness, for example. The internet might frame this hyper-individualistically, basically suggesting that because someone struggles with time blindness, their friends simply must accommodate their constant lateness. But social reality? It's a bit different. Sure, your most laid-back Type Z friends might genuinely not care if you're 2 hours late to dinner. But others, they're going to feel profoundly disrespected and are completely allowed to stop inviting you. You just can't impose your behavioral outcomes on someone else and demand they be okay with it. Okay, let's pivot to section 2, anxiety and financial avoidance. Unmanaged struggles don't just strain our friendships, they can completely devastate our bank accounts. Be honest, think about the last time you literally avoided looking at your bank account because you were just too stressed. Our analysis points out that severe anxiety can essentially tank your relationship with money through 2 extreme reactions. On the left, we have the avoidance response. This is literally not looking at your accounts, throwing collection notices right in the trash, and deluding yourself about how bad the problem is. On the right, there's the compensation response. This is treating consumerism as a way to replace your self-confidence, spending money just to feel like a better person. Both are driven by anxiety, and honestly, both lead straight to financial disaster. And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world stakes. Imagine this scenario. You're facing a terrifying $100,000 in business bills, and you have absolutely nothing in the bank. Panic attacks are totally inevitable here. And sure, sometimes external circumstances truly are outside of your control. But the key takeaway? Reclaiming your personal agency is the only thing that stops you from making that incredibly stressful situation fundamentally worse. You have to be the one to face the numbers. Which brings us to this foundational psychological truth. What gets measured gets managed. It's really that simple. Consistently looking at your financial numbers, like making yourself check a budgeting app multiple times a day, can actually help passively regulate your nervous system. Just the act of analyzing a number makes you want to improve it. It snaps you out of the delusion and builds a concrete, step-by-step path out of financial catastrophe. So, how do we get there? Let's get into section 3, tools for self-accountability. This brings us to a really powerful, maybe slightly conservative coded, but undeniable belief from our material. Almost all self-respect comes from self-accountability. If you want to respect yourself and improve your mental health, you've got to show up for yourself. So what does showing up actually look like? It's highly logistical, physical habits. We're talking about the basics that are just annoyingly hard to do when you're stressed. Things like daily budget app checks to force yourself to face financial reality, getting 10,000 steps to get out of your head, maintaining strict sleep hygiene, especially if you've historically relied on sleep aids, and keeping a clean, organized living space so the shame of a messy home doesn't trigger a random spending spree. These aren't deep therapy breakthroughs, they are practical, habit-driven tools that force accountability. Now, to be totally clear, focusing on self-accountability absolutely does not mean we ignore the world around us. We absolutely should acknowledge systemic structural issues. Like, yes, the for-profit U.S. healthcare system is profoundly broken. But acknowledging those massive issues doesn't mean you just abdicate your personal agency. You still have to play the hand you are dealt. You have to identify those cards, find your little pockets of control, and take daily actions. Even if you are deeply in debt, knowing exactly where every single dollar is going gives you a sense of agency that protects your mental health so much better than just playing the helpless victim. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final section, a community-first mindset. So this brings us to a major paradigm shift, a real move away from America's default individualistic culture. We live in a society where so much online advice tells us to center our entire identity around our personal limitations, our thoughts, our feelings. But the lived experiences shared in our source material show that this hyper-self-oriented thinking often leads to way worse mental health outcomes. By contrast, adopting a community-first mindset, where you actively self-edit your worst impulses for the sake of the people around you, actually yields far better long-term happiness and relationship security. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it completely reframes our whole idea of self-care. Visualizing yourself from the outside and editing your behavior based on what you would want to receive if you were on the other side, that is incredibly powerful. Because resisting that intense, burning urge to text bomb a friend during an anxiety spiral, or holding back from forcing a conflict resolution right this exact second, well, that isn't self-denial. It's actually the ultimate form of self-care. Why? Because you are preserving a safe, long-term relationship, which, let's be real, is what you actually want. We also have to stop falling into the trap of overestimating how easy things are for other people. It is so incredibly common to assume that life is just functionally easy for quote-unquote neurotypical people. But our mental health isn't the only thing that limits social bandwidth. Everyone is dealing with reduced capacities. Whether it's the intense pressure of running a business, being a brand new parent, caring for an aging relative, or just navigating a toxic workplace. Assuming your struggles are uniquely difficult only serves to isolate you further. Which leaves us with this final, really vital question to ponder. Are you using your diagnosis as a rigid identity that excuses your limitations? Or are you using it as a starting line for self-accountability? Because unpacking shame and accepting your brain chemistry, that's an essential first step. But the next step requires real humility and hard work. It requires using that knowledge to build the right tools, manage your money, and show up for the people you care about. Reclaiming your power to change is exactly how you build the stable, connected life you deserve. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will see you next time.